Here's a nice summary dealing with race and ethnicity, social class, all of these cultural categories. Also thinking about how you think about yourself and your internal space, right? So no matter where you are in life or where we are, we all have our prejudices. We all have our shortcomings when we're talking about dealing with others. How do you handle those? I had to handle mine on neatness. That was, just that was not a serious one, but I had a very serious issue, and I'll tell you about that later because if I tell you now, I give away the size me up. Children do know, so you got to begin to ask yourself these questions. How do you really process the prejudices that we come to classrooms with, and we all have them, right? And prejudice can range from minor up to egregious, right? In our classrooms, right? I had a prejudice for junk, right? They just call me a neat freak, right? I just wanted everything in the order. So of course, by the end of the year, my students were, going home cleaning everything. The parents was like, "Wow." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, because when they come in the class and they have to clean the desk, we have desk cleaning time every Friday. Okay, we got it down to 10 minutes. Okay, because I cannot walk in Monday and your paper's hanging all over. No, get it together. Get it together." And of course, I had to look. Right? Now, I'm not going to take a recess because that's crazy. Right? Never take recess because that's crazy. You're punishing yourself. You as a teacher are punishing. No, get out. Get all the energy out. Run till you fall out. So when you come back, you don't have any energy to talk to me. Right? I'm not going to take a recess away. My kids knew that. Right? And I expected them to do that. But that was a prejudice of mine. And I had to finally, once one student, more than one, that was just not their life. They just were not organized, neat students, right? And I couldn't stand them. But I had to get to a space where I had to deal with that prejudice. Honestly, I had to go, okay, you got problems, right? This is a prejudice, and it is impacting the student's ability to really learn. The kid is not comfortable in his own chair. He has to get to being neat before he can get to learning, and he didn't really need to be neat to learn, right? But I saw this one student struggling when I was teaching third grade, and I'm thinking, I've been teaching for all this time, and did I do this all my life? Oh, my goodness. This is crazy. This one kid manifested my prejudice to the point where I had to go, whoa, wow. It wasn't racial prejudice. It wasn't socioeconomic prejudice. It wasn't gender prejudice, right? But it was a prejudice to the culture that he brought to class, his own personal culture. And he couldn't work because he had to continue to think about what? Making sure his pencil was lined up, paper was there, desk is clean. That was just not who he was. But I layered my own prejudice on him and tried to make him live it. And it was November when he just broke down. And from then on, I was like, okay, you can do whatever you want. In fact, no more Friday cleanups. Was it a problem for me? Yes, I had to go get medication or go to counseling. I have a good friend in here. I'm not going to say her name, but she understands. And she bows her head. But honestly, after that, the last 4 years of my teaching career were so wonderful because I did not go into my classroom with this prejudice of making sure it was neat for some reason that I did not understand, right? And yes, I had to go somewhere and talk to somebody because it was also happening at home. All right. The next stage in cross-cultural interaction is understanding different behavior. Okay? We have to begin to understand different behavior because behaviors are going to be part of somebody's value system, the way they communicate, their roles, rituals, social status, situational behavior, time and space orientation, and their relationship to in-group and out-groups. We're just simply going to talk about situational behavior. Now, in the video, the situation there, those students, they're awesome actors, of course, right? So, I mean, they acted so well, you probably didn't think, oh, that was really a skit. But the students were so good that it seemed almost real, right? But they were good actors. But in that situation, those students came in to learn, and that was a science course, right? And they were all ready to do what they needed to do, and they were exposing or or displaying situational behavior for a high school student in a classroom, right? The teacher comes in completely outside of that situational space, right? His framework and his cultural space is inner city science courses, right? And he's coming in with this idea that he has to be tough and strong, and I've been teaching for 20 years, so I'm not having it, don't you mess with me, right? When that was not the situation. You have to begin to think about what situation you're in, and they're different every year, and sometimes different every month, especially if you're in transient schools where students are going in and out and in and out. This situation might be for this student, but it may not be the same situation from that student, even though they're living in the same apartment complex, right? And what we do is we layer these children with the same situation, and we treat them like, oh, yeah, you're from this area. Oh, poor thing. Or, oh, you're from this area. Oh, you got it. Everything's okay. Oh, your father's in the home. All right, so you have this situation. But we can't do that, right? Because what happens is then we deny that child what they may need if we're not looking at that child. And we have to ask ourselves when we're dealing with situation behavior, why am I standing in this situation? Why am I thinking that way, right? What is contributing to my thought process, my mindset, that I'm thinking that these kids are this way and that way? Do I have the data? Do I have some anecdotal? Have I done what Dr. Lewis said? Have I driven by? Have I called? So all of those things help us when we are dealing with our internal self, because every decision you make comes from this inside, this internal dialogue, right? This internal thinking. And we have to begin to think, you know, where is this coming from? And what contributes to the tenacity of me continuing to believe this, even though I may be in the classroom or in a different situation? The last stage in cross-cultural interaction is personal adjustments and growth, okay? Here we have categorization, differentiation, attribution, in-group, out-group, and learning styles. So here we get right into our teaching space, right? But first we have to think about us. So this is really talking about you. How do you categorize? How do you differentiate? How do you use attribution? Dr. Glass and I have done something on attribution, so I hope she jumps in when I talk about that a little bit. In-group, out-group, right? How do you feel about in-group, out-group relationships? How do you navigate them? We all have in-group, out-group. We have them at our places of worship. We have them in our neighborhoods. We have them in our schools. We have them even in our classrooms. How do you navigate that space? What do you think about when you're dealing with that? And finally, learning styles. How in the world do you learn? Watch this. This is one of the biggest problems in our classrooms. The way we learn, guess what we do? We map it right on top of those children. And we think, this is the way I learn. This is the way I teach. Because often your learning style is directly correlated to your teaching style, right? So if you learn auditorily by listening and hearing and talking, that's what you do in the classroom, right? And so you have these children that are sitting there that are spatial or any of those other intelligences that Howard Gardner has done, and you've just not even, they never get their intelligence heard, right? And so you want to begin to think about how does your learning style impact the classroom. Today, I'm just going to talk about categorization. As we looked at the video, we understand that categorization is a way to help us put things in order. Your brain and our brain cannot take all the information in without putting it in categories, right? So categories give birth to stereotypes or give birth to prejudice, right? But categories are necessary to keep your brain from exploding, right? It's like a computer. It has to categorize it. The thing is that how strong are the parameters of your category, right? So if you put it in a box, does that box have holes in it? Or is that box so rigid that it cannot move information through and in and out, right? So internal competence allows for perforated boxes. Boxes that information can move. Oh, I thought it was that, but oh, it's really that, right? Oh, I thought it was this. Oh, but it's that. Oh, every one of those people are not like that, right? My boxes have perforation in them so that information can move and flow. When they don't, when they're just very rigid and do not have perforated edges or holes in them, or they're not easily moved through, stereotypes and prejudice are built. And that's why we go back to that first question. What contributes to the tenacity of how you think about certain people, certain children, certain students? What contributes to the tenacity of what you just thought about me? Right? That you couldn't think about a different way of me being. Right? I mean, when you get to the end, you'll say, okay, many of you are right on target, but what contributes to that? How do you know those things? And is there space for you to think of me differently? Can you really think of me differently than what you've thought of me? Even though you might be spot on. Right? Do you give yourself a pat on the back? See, I know. That contributes to making those boxes more rigid when you're right in very small situations. All right, so from internal to now culture. Of course, you know the word culture is thrown around so much and so watered down and so convoluted that everything is culture, right? Culture is the new or the old buzzword. But here's a very old diagram of culture. It's showing us surface and deep. Of course, surface culture is the culture that's above the water. It is things that you can hear, see, touch. When you're thinking about culture, you're thinking about things that you can see, hear, touch. That's on your surface. These are explicitly learned things, right? Things that are conscious, things that are easily changed. But this is where culture matters to most people. It's the deep culture, the beliefs, the values, right? So go back to the teacher, the substitute teacher. He devalued their names. What do you think those students are going to think about him? Yeah, you think they're going to work for him? Only thing they're going to do, if they have to work for him, they're going to work for him out of fear and just to do enough to get by. They do not value him anymore. So before you start your role next year, try to make sure you understand and pronounce the name. And if you don't know how to pronounce it, ask the kid to come over quietly and say, how do you pronounce your name? That's an awesome name, right? And you have to say this awesome name because you have to know why it's awesome. So let me give you one for free. Many of the young, and this is being documented as we speak, many of the young, specifically, let's talk specifically. Now, you all know who we're talking about, so don't even try to hide. Many of the young African-American mothers who are naming children, names, you have to understand the psychological space in that. And it's really, really powerful. So here's my theory. One thing is that these mothers are wanting their children to be unique, right? They are not wanting them to be this bland name, right? But one of the most interesting things that I think in this theory is when you look at these names and you look at the spellings of these names, you realize that they are bucking the grammatical space. Now, I have a bachelor's in English with a minor in Latin. So when I read, right? So when I'm reading these names, I'm going, how in the world? I don't know what it is. Because you can't put Q and K together. That just doesn't work. Right? It just doesn't work. It does not work in our language. So how in the world Q, K get together? I don't know. Either use one or the other. Right? So, I mean, it was dramatic for me when I was teaching. I'm thinking, no, why you do that? So when the parents came up, like, now come here. Explain that to me. Talk to me about this name. I need to understand. Seriously. And I mean, I had to report with my parents, all the black parents, the white parents, the Latino. I need to understand why you do this to that child. He can't even spell it. I can't even pronounce it for him. It doesn't work. Right? Now, I mean, we can laugh, but we know our Irish friends, Sean, S-E-A-N. Come on. S-E-A-N. How do you make that Sean? Tell me how you make scene Sean. So when I had a scene, I said, what the world? Well, there you go. The explanation was in the Gaelic language, S-E-A-N is Sean, right? That's Gaelic. And they brought that here. So now when we see Sean Connery, who is what? Right. It is S-E-A-N, right? Because it is from an historical Gaelic space. Right? And I know I have some people up there. Joan can chime in and talk about those types of things. But they're bringing that language in here. Now watch this. So go back to the African American parents. Go back to that. All right, connect. Let's connect that. Now let's connect those dots. One of the strongest things, and I'll talk about this later when we talk about language next week. But one of the strongest connections any person has, specifically the African American culture, to the culture that was stripped, is language. Right? So in West Africa, in those African languages, the th, right, did not exist. So when the Africans, who were the only population of people in the U.S. who were not taught English explicitly as a second language, when we had to assimilate the language, the went to the sound what? Duh, because that was the sound of the African tongue. Got it? Makes a lot of sense. So when you see da bomb, and you're like, oh, that's Ebonics, but guess what? The African American population will fight you into the end of the world because it's the only connection. Then they can go, okay, wait a minute. In what part of Africa do they use the? What part of the world? Oh, you may be able to connect that, right? So when you're looking at these mothers, they are doing things that they probably don't even realize, but they're trying to connect. They're making things, and I'm looking at these names like, wow. And then if you go and you look at some of the Ashanti languages, some of the Yoruba languages, you go, they don't know. They cannot be that well informed to name their children using syllables and diagraphs that don't exist in English, and then they're long, right? And I'm not talking about the morphing of languages. We want to begin to think about this deep culture, this deep culture, and names are one of them. So please, if you get anything right, get the name. And if you don't know it, call them over, have them pronounce it, and let them know that name is awesome. Why? Because guess what? I don't know where it comes from, but it comes from somewhere. If nothing else, that your mother wanted to make you unique, right? So when you walk into a room and somebody says your name, if somebody says her husband's name, I mean, I only know one of them. So if anybody says, do you know a Chioki? Oh, well, of course I do. And so in one of my classes, I had Russian students from Somalia, students from Ethiopia, and I call those 2 to 3 years my United Nation years, right? Because I had really children from everywhere, and having to learn those names. And if you ever try to learn a Russian name, right? And in those days, Sharapova, it was like 15, 20 years ago. That was not a big name, right? But now we heard it so much in tennis, right? Maria Sharapova, that the name rolls off your mouth much easier. But if you don't ever hear those languages, you don't really know them. Last thing about names and deep culture before we jump into this activity is I had a set of twins one year. They were kindergartners. And their name was Orangelo and Lemangelo, spelled orange jello and lemon jello. And they were 5-year-olds, so 5-year-olds, right? They're proud of their names. They're just learning it. It's becoming this wonderful thing. Of course, I'm writing it everywhere, on the desk, on the cubbies. It's, I have to write these names everywhere. One of the things I did ask the mom, I said, so, could you tell me the origin of the name? That's all she ate during the last couple of months of pregnancy was Jell-O. That's all she ate. That's all she wanted to eat. She drank water and ate Jell-O. I said, oh, okay. All right, so, but knowing that origin helped me understand where the name came from. I mean, it didn't have to be sensible to me, right? It didn't have to make sense. It was just where it came from. I'm thinking, is this a family name? Because when you're reading Orange and Lemon Jello as a child's name, you want to know where does it come from? All right, so let's run through this very, very quickly. This is a perception activity, right? So say the first thing that comes to your mind, I want you to say it out loud so that we can all hear it, and I'll try to capture some of the things. Ready? First thing that comes to your mind when you see this word is? Say it. All right, first thing. So look at these words. The first thing that comes to your mind is, honestly, this is another psychological activity. When you first think of something, it is most likely where you're going with it, right? If you go blank, that means you you just don't have any reference to it. It should be coming to your first. So when you say race, black, white, right? We are still living in that space, honestly. When we have a Latino population who has just exceeded the African American population in the United States, being the number one or the largest minority, and encroaching upon being the majority, right? But we don't think about that. We don't say Latino, right? If you were someone else. Right, but that would also be that you would be someone else. See, for instance, you are you. So if you thought black and white, you thought black and white because you live here, right? Because this is your cultural space. And that's correct. If you do this in California, guess what's going to happen? Right. It's going to, black, because here's a Californian, a native Californian here, she's going to probably say black, white, Latino, or Latino, right? Right, because that's her cultural space, but it's not in your cultural space. And that's what I'm saying. We have to begin to think about, where are we? Where are you personally? Where is your space? Ethnicity. Well, what in the world is that? I thought ethnicity was black. No, it's not. There's a difference in your race and your ethnicity. Race is this nebulous construct that came out of colonialization, right? To categorize people based on their skin color, right? Ethnicity is more my culture, right? So I just had a talk a couple of days ago, and we talked about the difference. We did the census, right? So in the census, it has African American, black African American. Then it has Asian, and it has Asian American, Latino, Hispanic. Then it has white, Caucasian, and it has all those things. And so we had to discuss that. And boy, what a discussion that was, right? Because ethnicity deals with the culture. So there were, in the audience, there were people from all over the world. So there was one Asian person that said, you know what, that is offensive to me because I'm not American. And Asian is so big. What does that mean, right? Can you make that Asian American? And I said, well, I'm picking with. I said, no, there's an other down there. Just write in what you want. Well, that's what the other is for, right? Ooh, that just ticked off the whole group. I said, well, that's what I'm here for, to tick you off, right? So I said, well, let's discuss that. Well, why not? Well, no, I want to see Asian American if it's going to be that broad category. I said, well, you can put Asian Indian. You can put Asian Chinese. You can put Asian, Malaysian. All of that in that other box. Oh, they did not want that, right? But I knew that they wouldn't want it. So then there was someone from the Caribbean islands, and they was like, well, I'm not African American, and I don't consider myself black. I'm Caribbean. I said, okay, well, all right. And I speak Spanish, so where am I? I said, right. Got it? That's ethnicity. So when you look at these children, they're all black, or they're all white, or you're thinking they're all Latino, they all have they could have different ethnicities right in your classroom. So when I was in the classroom, 24 children, second grade, 17 of them black for the census. Breaking those children down, there were Somalians, there were Ethiopians, there were African Americans, right? And I had to be very clear that your race may be this nebulous construct of black, but your ethnicities are very different, right? Very, very different. And I have to begin to deal with those ethnicities and not look at all these black children or all these Latino children or even all these white children as the same. Because my Russian student was nothing like my white American student, right? Even though she is Russian and classified as white. But you see that white Caucasian? What does that leave anybody? I mean, so she's Russian, so she just sticks white. No identity to her ethnicity, right? It just washes away. And so we want to begin to think about that when we're looking at children. What might their ethnicity be, right? Social class. So you have social class and social status, right? So class is different from status. Class deals with economy, how much money you make, right? So if you're in a higher class, that's your tax bracket. Status deals with your position, right? So traditionally, ministers and preachers in communities have a high social status, but they may not have a high class, right? Well, you know, some of them. If you were working in Japan as a teacher, you would have a high social status, right? And so we can keep on going down. And another one that kind of tripped you up was ability. We don't think about our ability, right? Guess what that's called? That's called ability privilege, right? So nobody came into this room and said, oh my goodness, there's stairs going up there. So if I wanted to sit in the back and I was on crutches or I was in a wheelchair, I don't have access to the back. Because you don't even worry about that. You can get up there and walk. That's ability privilege. When children come to your classroom and they don't have the ability, physical abilities, you have to begin to think about that. And the ADA requires us to do a lot to make sure students have ability. And that's why this is a front row, and these chairs pull out, and children and students in wheelchairs can sit here, right? But that still says nothing for if I like to sit in the back, right? So that's ability. We don't think about that. You don't think about ability because it's ability privilege. If I did to you what I do to my students on the first day of classroom to teach them about privilege, I simply say, okay, my name is Dr. Hancock, and this is how it's going to work. We have one break. That break is for 5 minutes. The bathroom's in the hallway. Now, I've tried it. I went down there, used the bathroom, washed my hands, got back in less than 5 minutes. If you cannot do it when you come back late, you will be tardied. 3 tardies is absence. 1 absence is 1 class grade dropped. The students are like, is he serious? So you always get a brave student. Now, I don't do it to my master's students because I know, they're grown people. But my undergraduate students, they go, is he serious? And I don't smile because I got the face. Guess what happens after about 5 minutes? There's one brave hand that goes, we can't get down there and back in 5 minutes. And I'm saying, of course you can. I did it. Well, first of all, all of us are women. We all have to use the same bathroom first. Second of all, it takes a little longer. I'm like, well, then you got to do something about that. So then I go, well, how did that make you feel? Right? After we break it through, I'm like, okay, let me stop playing. You get a 15-minute break. And they go, oh, my gosh, this man is crazy. But I said, now, how did that make you feel? See, it is my privilege as a male. It's called male privilege. And if I map that on top of you, you probably won't pass my course, right? Just like in the video, he mapped his privilege on top of them, right? And they won't pass unless they're Timothy or Denise, right? So don't map your privilege on top of your students, right? Understand these categories, right? Because we all have privilege, and we fight for those privileges silently and sometimes verbally. And when we do that, and we don't not conscious of it, we begin to map those on students. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. And that connects to expectations, right? So making sure you have those stair level expectations. Don't go in there with the expectation you're 3rd graders, you should be able to do X, Y, Z. Right, in my course, when I was going through teacher ed, I was taught this phrase, you should be able to teach a child off the bed. Meaning because I was going to early child education, off the bed meant they did not go to any preschool, right? And so if they come into my classroom as a kindergartner, I should be able to teach a child right out of the bed. So you got out of the bed and you came right to school. You've never in your life been to any other educational space. If you're going to a classroom like that, then your expectations are always stair-step, right? I go right in there like, okay, I don't know where you are. And I'm not trying to pretend, even my 3rd graders, you're supposed to read on 3rd, 4th grade level. That ain't even my business. My business is I'm here to teach you how to read. If you can't, I'm going to start low and see who jumps out, right? My jump outers, go ahead and jump out, and I'll differentiate for you. But you should go in there with expectations that are stair-step, right? Yes, children should, and I don't know who makes that should, be able to do X, Y, Z, and 1, 2, 3. But you as a teacher can go in with a totally different mindset so that you can step those students up. Got it? And remember to not map on our privileges, right? Or map on our own culture. Because once we do that, that's internal cultural competence gone awry. And we saw that in that video, right? So you don't want to be that substitute teacher. On this, you have a cultural identity pie, right? So one side is your cultural identity pie. And what I want you to do is use those percentages. Now, on the paper, you're going to have a lot of the same markers that are up here, a couple of extra ones. You do not have to use all of them, and you can add a couple of them if you want to. You can add as many as you want. What I want you to do is, how do you think about yourself, okay, for this cultural pie? What percentage of you think of yourself in gender terms, right? So when you look at that pie, out of 100%, when you think about yourself, remember we were talking about internal dialogue, our internal selves, this internal culture. How do you think about yourself? Okay, so go ahead and do that activity. I'm going to give you about 90 seconds, a minute and a half to run through that very quickly. Now, you don't have to create the pie because we have about 12 minutes before lunch. You don't have to create the pie. Just go ahead and put the percentages in. And if none of those categories work for you, add your own categories. Okay? They're pretty much the same up here except with the exception of profession and political stance. Yes. Yes. So 100% of yourself, the whole self. How much of that do you think of yourself? And trust me, you don't have to use all of those monikers. You can use 2, 3 of them. You can use one of them. You can use none of them. You can make your own one up. How do you think about yourself? Now, let me tell you a little bit about what the research has said in this type of activity. Most minorities are going to go to race and ethnicity as a majority. It is going to be one of the top 3, right? And anybody know why that might be? Right. Minorities are forced to think about themselves in what? Color. Got it? Whites are not ever going to put it. I mean, they are ranking way at the low. How many of you even thought about race when you put it? Right. That is what the research is telling us. That the majority does not think of themselves as racial or in this racial space, but minorities are going to have it in there in the top 3 spaces, right? Ethnicity or race is going to be somewhere. It's going to be one of those high-ranking ones. Now, this is, of course, not blanket and generalized, but it is what the numbers are showing us. It is what the data is saying. Very correct. So women will go more with women than men will do men. We won't do men first. We know we men. We don't have to think about that, right? But women have to think about that. Why? Because you're subjected, right? But it's the same thing with students who are not majority. They're coming in there knowing that they're black. You didn't have to tell them. The society already told them. You don't have to tell them that they're bad. The society already told them that, right? And so they come in with this idea. It's already mapped on. The hegemonic reality of the American culture has mapped onto these children who they are and their racist spaces, right? Whites don't have to think about the fact that they're white because it doesn't matter. When you're the majority, it does not matter. The minority will think about it because they have to navigate through